Washoe County Library System welcomes you to a wonderful history series that delves into fascinating Nevada topics with local experts. The Nevada Historical Society presents High Noon with Neal Cobb. Today we have another very special program, Bohos, Hucksters, and Hippies. Oh my! A quick dash through 20th century Virginia City. Former longtime district administrator for the Comstock Historic District Commission and the Comstock History Center Museum in Virginia City, Michael A. Burt Bedeau will examine how Virginia City and the Comstock evolved in the 20th century from a dying mining town into a booming tourist mecca. My name is Terry, and I am so happy to be hosting today. And now it is my pleasure to introduce Sherry Hayes Zorn.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Tim. And thank you to the Washoe County Libraries. We so appreciate their generosity and their continued support to allow us to share these great programming opportunities like High Noon, as well as what we're doing for While We're Closed, our On the Go series, our Nevada history lectures that are happening once a month at the first Saturdays of the month at Sierra View Library. So thank you again, and thank you for joining us today. We have a great program and I'm excited. I hope you will enjoy it today. But I have to introduce our host, Neal Cobb, who is our honorary historian, curator, who has been a longtime supporter here at the Nevada Historic Society. And we so appreciate him helping share great Nevada history and letting people know about the oldest museum in the state. So without further ado, let me introduce Neal Cobb. Hey, Neal.
Hey, how you doing there, Sherry? Thanks for the nice info. Michael A. Burt Bedeau, an architectural and general historian, is our speaker today. Burt recently retired after serving for 23 years as the district and administrator for the Comstock Historic District Commission and the Comstock History Center Museum in Virginia City. As a member of the Nevada State Historic Preservation Office staff, he often worked with both the architectural historian and the historian in a wide variety of areas. He gained museum experience from his time in the Comstock History Center that opened in 2005. He's been with them since that very date. He is proud to have been a founding board member of Preserve Nevada and served in that capacity for 15 years. He served on the board of Social for Society, for the commercial archaeology, holding several positions, including being a co-editor for the journal. Prior to coming to Nevada, Burt worked for the Idaho State Historical Society, and before that, the South Dakota State Historical Society. He received a Master's of Arts degree in Historic Preservation Studies from Boston University in 1989. He also holds a Juris Doctor degree from the Washington College of Law. Along with that, the American University of Washington, D.C. as a Bachelor of Arts in History from the Occidental College in Los Angeles, California. Burt was born in Salt Lake City and grew up in that state. Then on the other side of the Sierra Nevada, where his father's people have been since the gold rush days. So at this time, we'd like to welcome Burt Bedeau.
Thank you very much, Neal. And thank you to all the other introducers for very kind welcome. I will now push the share button and see if we can bring up our presentation. And good afternoon to everybody. Okay, I give you fair warning that I am a complete computer moron, so if there are technical glitches, it's all my fault. Aha, okay, we have a title page here. That's a good start. The title of my presentation, as previously mentioned, is Hucksters, Bohos, and Hippies, oh my. a little 20th century dance through the evolution of Virginia City. This project began, probably 10, maybe even more years ago, as an examination of the documentation with the National Register of Historic Places for the Comstock. The original documentation basically dealt with the 19th century history of Virginia City. And that's a pretty typical story that most of you have heard. Here's Virginia City, and I have to give a shout out to my friend Liz Huntington, the Comstock's own photo ninja, who you can see stalking around in the early hours of most mornings with a giant telephoto lens, taking glorious photographs of the environment up there. This is one of my favorite pictures that she took one day while climbing up the side of Mount Davidson. And it shows really the Comstock to its best and most beautiful advantage. The 19th century history of Virginia City can sort of be synthesized in basically miners came, found some silver, built some mines, a town sprang up, they made some money, and it played out, and then they moved on. And this is kind of what was left at the beginning of the 20th century. But that's not really the entire story. So the question then being, what happened after that? How did we go from this into the 20th century, where we find in the very early part of the 20th century, and you can see that this is a photograph from the early beginnings of real photo postcards with a typical, 1920s, 1930s automobile sitting in the corner with the Wells Fargo building falling into ruins. How did we progress from that? So I started investigating into the rest of the story, as Paul Harvey used to say. And it really begins with this lady. And at this point in my live presentation, I ask people to tell me who this is. And it's kind of surprising, given her previous fame and fortune, that most people don't know who this is. But in 1920, this lady was possibly one of the most famous women on the planet. If anybody can answer the question, I usually give out a prize. At one point, it was a V&T key ring. At another point, it was a Snickers bar. So for any of you who at home who can answer correctly who this lady is, consider yourselves given what Stan Lee of Marvel Comics used to call a no prize. This is Mary Pickford. Who was possibly the most well-paid and most famous movie star in the world in 1920. She had been America's sweetheart since the very early days of motion pictures, and by 1919 had formed what became United Artists with Douglas Fairbanks, Charlie Chaplin, and D.W. Griffith. She also found herself in a very unpleasant marriage to a guy named Owen Moore, who was an alcoholic and a failed actor and an abuser in a very nasty sort of way. She'd also found that through a close association in the movies and also in a very long war bond tour during the First World War, that she had fallen in love with Douglas Fairbanks Sr. And they wanted a divorce, fairly fast divorce. And in 1919, 1920, fast divorces were not a thing in any jurisdiction in the United States and in most places overseas. However, the situation in Nevada was a little different. There had been other jurisdictions in the United States that had a reputation for fairly easy divorce terms, my former state of South Dakota being one, but the progressive movement had really gotten their teeth into divorce mills in the early part of the 20th century, and there had been a lot of, quote, reform, unquote, on that front. The divorce requirements in Nevada still required a 6-month residency for anybody that wasn't a Nevada resident, but there were vaguenesses in the state law. And a certain attorney who later became a U.S. senator by the name of Pat McCarran was retained by Mary Pickford to take advantage of those. And in 1920, in the spring of 1920, Mr. McCarran escorted Ms. Pickford to a ranch outside of Genoa, where she spent a grand total of 2 weeks while he made various maneuvers at the courthouse in Minden and obtained for her a divorce through various loopholes and possibly the exchange of a few dollars, including $100,000 to her former husband, which in 1920 was a very substantial sum, the equivalent to about $1.5 million in today's money, to achieve a divorce, which was signed on the line, which was dotted. 2 weeks later, Mary Pickford and Douglas Fairbanks ran off to Europe and immediately got married. All of this did not escape the national press. Here is a picture of Douglas Fairbanks, and you can see why she might have been quite excited about running off with him. And here's their wedding picture from 2 weeks after she obtained her Nevada divorce. This did not escape the notice of the national and international press. And so Nevada, being a site for easy and quick divorces, suddenly became a national phenomenon. So that put us squarely in what was the beginnings of the divorce trade. And that became more and more of an industry in Northern Nevada over the course of the next few years. Now we segue to our next character in the story, the eminent George Wingfield, otherwise known by many people, including many of my relatives in Lassen County, as son of a bitch Wingfield. And you have to say it all in one word very quickly with a lot of vigor. Mr. Wingfield, seeing a good thing and knowing how to exploit it in various ways, managed to obtain, this is also his bank, by the way, oh God, I'm blanking on the actual name of the bank. But anyway, it was a big bank in downtown Reno, and he had made his fortune through banking and various other financial shenanigans starting in Central Nevada during the Central Nevada Gold Rush at the very beginning of the century. So at any rate, but in 1927, he had obtained the remains of the Riverside Hotel, which had burned, and rebuilt it, thanks to hiring our most prolific and renowned local architect, Frederick de Longchamp, specifically with an eye towards attracting wealthy out-of-state divorcees to come to Nevada, establish their residency, and take advantage of our divorce laws. He also, through various political influence, had managed to get the residency requirements for divorce reduced from 6 months, which it had been at the time of the Pickford divorce, down to 3 months in the 1927 legislature. And that also helped to attract people to this hotel and to Reno in particular for their divorces. So that was the next step in the evolution of the divorce trade. And as you can see, the Hotel Riverside was also conveniently located next to the Washoe County Courthouse, and also the infamous now sadly departed Virginia Street Bridge over the Truckee River, which the tradition said one threw one's wedding ring into after the divorce decree was granted. This whole process was what Walter Winchell came to call getting renovated for New York socialites in the 1920s and 30s. So this, by the late 20s and early 30s, became quite the industry and was one of the reasons why Reno did reasonably well in the Great Depression. And you can see this shot of Virginia Street with the Hotel Riverside at the end of Virginia Street, and the arch put up for the exhibition in 1927 over Virginia Street. Oh, no, wrong way. My apologies. Here we see my technical difficulties. And here's a wonderful little sort of summary of the divorce experience done by Lou Heimers, which I borrowed from my friend Mela Harmon, who did probably the quintessential work on Reno and the divorce trade. I still would like to see her manuscript published as a book, but it's a great image, and that sort of sums up the divorce trade. So you ask, why am I ranting and raving about divorces, and what does that have to do with Virginia City? Well, you know, again, in 1927, we have a 3-month waiting period, a residency period for granting of divorces. And again, in that period of time, you have a lot of people with leisure on their hands. And that means that there is time to explore the environment. Well, there are people in Virginia City who, of course, are looking to survive in a town whose previous livelihood has vanished in a puff of silver ore and dust, who see the potential for exploiting these people that have leisure time on their hands and are interested in the environment in which they find themselves. And one of those people is a man named George Cummings. And George Cummings owned Mary's Building, which is located where the post office is currently in Virginia City. This building actually faced onto B Street, but it occupied a very large lot. And then there were commercial buildings down below that faced onto C Street. And in the late 1920s, George Cummings owned a business called the Truck and Trash, which was essentially a used furniture dealership. And he scavenged around Virginia City and the general environment up there and made a living off of recycling the abandoned bits and pieces of the Comstock and the Comstock boom days. And he got the idea, and he was a promoter of the first order. He proposed, among other things, a scenic automobile route to the top of Mount Davidson for the general enjoyment of the tourists. He was a promoter. He was probably the first true huckster that we had in Virginia City. And he got it into his idea that the generally abandoned junk that he used to collect and try and make a living off of could, with the right spin, be tarted up to have a little bit more romance and be sold at a much higher rate of return to visiting tourists and, for lack of a better word, rubes from the East. And so he went about advertising his renamed business in the Reno papers and in circulars and in other tourist oriented publications in an effort to lure folks up to Virginia City and to basically make a buck off of them. And this was how the tourist industry really begins to start in Virginia City. Unfortunately, Mary's Building is no longer there. It burned in a very spectacular fire. I believe it was 1950. And for those of you that are interested, when the Historical Society reopens, there is a spectacularly funny letter that Lucius Beebe wrote to Bernard DeVoto about the night of the fire when Mary's building burned, and how it all evolved into a giant street party, because one of the businesses that was in the lower part on C Street that also burned was the Wonder Bar. And they had to evacuate all the booze out of the building, and it turned into a very massive street party with all the volunteer fire departments and everybody in town coming out to basically watch the building burn and get absolutely annihilated in the process. So, so for those of you that want to check that out, Sherry can help you out in looking in that, because it's definitely worth a read. And one of these days, all those letters ought to be published in some sort of form, because it's just hilariously funny. So at any rate, following on Mr. Cummings's efforts, there were other entrepreneurs and following in the huckster vein that came along shortly thereafter. And probably the best and most genius of them was a man named Paul Smith. And Paul Smith came to Virginia City probably in 1929, as far as I can tell, and bought the Truck and Trash from Cummings and renamed it the Museum of Memories, and moved. He had several locations around town, but he was in what is now the northern half of the Bucket of Blood, right on the corner at C and Union Streets. And he was probably the king god of all hucksters. He just kept thinking of new and interesting ways to make a dime off of visitors and tourists. And as you can see from his storefront here, which I think is probably dates from the early 1930s, based on the NRA logo in the window, he was always on the hustle. Always trying to think of new things, new ways. He put out publications. He found an old top hat that he insisted was John Mackey's top hat, and he put a big sign under it in the front window that said "Not for sale at any price." And he got outrageous offers of hundreds of dollars for John Mackey's top hat, and there was no evidence that it was remotely John Mackey's top hat, but it lured people in. He used to pay the high school kids to go out and collect bundles of sage and tie it up with string, and then he would sell it for 10 cents a piece. He'd pay the kids a nickel a piece, and then he'd jack it up to 10 cents and sell it to the tourists. He also paid them to collect tailings off the old tailings piles for the mines, and put it into poke bags and sell that for 25 cents a piece as genuine Comstock ore. He was always working it, and he was quite the character. He used to tool around. He was a little short guy who used to tool around town in a bowler hat. And he ran the Museum of Memories for many years in Virginia City, and was probably the earliest and best entrepreneur of fleecing the tourists that Virginia City had through the 1930s and into the 1940s. All right, let's see what we've got next here. And here's another view with the Museum of Memories at its site at the corner. And you can see that this is probably an image from maybe the late 1930s, 1940. And you can see that the old main drag is beginning to perk up a little bit. This is, of course, after the repeal of Prohibition. And you've got some of the bars reopening and a little bit of traffic on C Street. And that's, here's the actual site. Now, this is a photograph that I took while I was still up on the hill. This is the original Bucket of Blood over here on the south end. And then this is the old Fredericksburg Brewery on the brick part that was where the Museum of Memories was. And eventually the McBrides took over both parts of the building, and now it all constitutes the Bucket of Blood. The other thing that helped spur tourism in general, and also specifically on the Comstock, was in 1931 when gaming, I should say, in the correct parlance of our state, was reintroduced as a legal pastime. It never really disappeared. It was always just in the back room. But in 1931, the state legislature introduced legal gaming in Nevada, and that helped boost the economy and attract more tourism and more visitors to the state. And here's a photograph of, I think this was the first night at the Bank Club in Reno in 1931. And also in 1933, the repeal of prohibition certainly brought everybody back out from the back rooms in various bars and speakeasies and across the state. And again, this was a state that never took prohibition even remotely seriously, but you know, again, it made things much easier and much more in line with how people's feelings were, and it certainly helped to boost the tourist economy. So by the middle 1930s, the situation in Virginia City was very much coming along the lines of what we expect in Virginia City now, with bars and restaurants and gambling halls and everything like that. So we fast forward again to the late 1930s, and the next real boost and change in tourism comes again from Hollywood. And we have a premiere of and the distribution of a real stinker of a movie from Warner Brothers, starring Errol Flynn, Miriam Hopkins, and Humphrey Bogart as the bad guy, doing one of the worst performances anybody's ever seen from Humphrey Bogart, called Virginia City. And it is a thoroughly unmemorable movie that should be buried deep in the backyard. But the real important thing about Virginia City, the film, is the party that they had in Virginia City to commemorate the premiere of the movie. This is the outdoor picnic that they had in the parking lot next to the Bucket of Blood in 1940. And this is while everybody was still reasonably dressed up and sober. By the time that the movie stars were all supposed to show up for the indoor party at Piper's Opera House, the town was so out of control that the movie studios decided that it was a little too dangerous to bring the movie stars up the hill. So they all stayed at the Mapes in Reno. But the correspondents for the various newspapers and tabloids that were there to cover the event had come to Virginia City. And one of them, who made it to Piper's Opera House and observed Virginia City at its most exuberant, if that's a good word, was this guy, your friend and mine, Lucius Beebe. Beebe was a correspondent at that point for the New York Herald Tribune, was the sort of major domo of what was known as Cafe Society in New York City. He was a very flamboyant character. He was very much out of the closet and gay. Had liked to claim that he had been thrown out of both Harvard and Yale, and was the only person to have that distinction. He was a member of a very old and very wealthy New England family, and was without a doubt one of the sharpest pens in American letters in the early part of the 20th century. He was also a fanatical railroad nut, and wrote books about trains on the side. He was duly impressed with the Comstock's ability to imbibe large quantities of alcohol, and was a huge fan of everything having to do with the American West and Western history. And he never forgot his time in Virginia City. So when it came to having to relocate, because of taxes after the Second World War on inherited wealth in New York City, New York State. Both he and his partner, Chuck Clegg, decided that coming to Nevada and taking advantage of the lack of taxes on inherited wealth in Nevada, and in fact on income at all at that point in time, and still to this day, was not a bad thing. And so in 1950, they came west again in 1947 in a private railroad car that they owned, to write a book called Mixed Train Daily, which is probably their best book on railroad history, and stayed the entire summer parked in the V&T Railroad Yard in Carson City. And at that point, I think they scoped it out and decided that they were going to relocate to Nevada. And they came here in 1950. This is a picture of Beebe and Clegg in the offices of the Territorial Enterprise, which they revived in 1952. And this is a picture of their house on A Street, which they bought and renovated in 1950. It was pretty much an abandoned shell when they bought it. There was a horse being stabled in it when they bought it, and they renovated it in what someone called the Victorian whorehouse revival. But they moved here in 1950 and revived the newspaper, the Territorial Enterprise, in 1952, and wrote for it, and built. This is an old image from a map that was published in the 1860s of the original offices of the Territorial Enterprise. This is the third home of the Territorial Enterprise, as renovated by Beebe and Clegg in the 1950s when they reopened the newspaper. They brought it out as a weekly, and it featured Beebe's writing and a lot of guest columns from various literati that they knew, and it rapidly became the largest circulating weekly newspaper in the United States in the 1950s. And it really helped to put post-war Virginia City on the map. The most important part of this was that they built a new printing plant on the D Street side of the old Territorial Enterprise building. And this is a picture of that building, very nondescript, very, you drive by it 100 times, but it's probably the most important building in post-war Virginia City because of what went on there. The Enterprise was tremendously important to Virginia City, and it really drew a huge amount of attention and a huge amount of increased visitorship in the post-war period to Virginia City. It also drew a very large influx of like-minded bohemian people to Virginia City in the 1950s. A lot of cafe society people. And it really ratcheted up the attention that Virginia City got in the 1950s, in not only locally, but internationally. And that led directly to the attention that the community got as a result of the 100th anniversary of the discovery of silver in 1959. Lucius Beebe was the chairman of the Silver Centennial Committee, and here's your humble servant examining one of the banners that had survived from the Silver Centennial that was donated to the Comstock History Center. That's back when I didn't have as much silver hair as I do now. So yeah, that was a massive and major promotion that occurred. Here's a stamp that was issued by the United States government in commemoration of the Silver Centennial in 1959. There was a huge celebration, but probably the most important thing that came out of that was a huge publicity blitz that attracted the attention of this man, a guy named David Dortort, who was a producer in Hollywood, who contracted with NBC. And his mission was to create a competitor to the most popular show on television in the late 1950s. And at this point, this is where I ask another one of my questions, which is, who remembers what the most popular show on television was in the late 1950s? And many people can remember that from 1955 to 1959, the most popular television show on television was on the CBS network, and it was Gunsmoke. And people just didn't miss Gunsmoke. It was like must-see television back before there was must-see television. And NBC, which is owned by the Radio Corporation of America, RCA, was in the process of developing color TV. And they wanted a color answer to Gunsmoke. And David Dortor was the guy that they tasked with coming up with the color answer to Gunsmoke. And he was a frequent visitor to this part of the country. He had known Beebe for years and was a frequent guest at their house. And he came up with the idea of using the colorful history of Virginia City and the scenery of the Sierra, and particularly Lake Tahoe, to come up with Bonanza. And once Bonanza hit the airwaves with the flaming map, with the big words Virginia City on it, with these guys, striding around, and particularly in color, riding up Barton's Meadow with Tahoe in the background, we were off to the tourist races. And sorry for the fuzziness of the picture, but it's a screen capture. And so beginning in 1959, and particularly after color television came in the early 1960s, the tourism industry in Virginia City went absolutely bonkers. 24 hours a day, busloads and busloads of tourists in Bermuda shorts and Dr. Scholl's sandals with Instamatic cameras, coming and going and going and coming, and just no end to it. And it got so bad that Lucius Beebe and Chuck Clegg sold the newspaper and abandoned their house. Well, they didn't abandon it. They just left and moved down to Hillsborough, California, because they couldn't stand all the tourists in Virginia City anymore. So they were sort of, well, as Shakespeare said, hoisted on their own petard. They couldn't take it anymore. And so because of all their promotion and because of all the that they had written about Virginia City, they essentially ruined their own town for them. So that was kind of what you call ironic. And as a result of that, this is a stage mock-up from Bonanza of what they thought Virginia City looked like. And as a result of that, Virginia City began to adapt itself to look more like the way Virginia City looked on TV and not the way Virginia City really looked. And my favorite example of that is that this is a little piece of the eastern side of C Street, just north of the intersection with Union Street. And this is how it looked at about 1940. This is a Walt Mulcahy image. And as you can see, there's a pretty contemporary garage building and a Victorian building that has been adapted to, work with along with the garage. And here we see what it looked like after it had been Bonanza-fied in 1961. And this was what was going on in town as the tourists' expectations began to dictate what was happening to the community. Because people came to town and they expected it to look like their sort of vague idea of what the TV show looked like. And so we began to get wagon wheel chandeliers and, Pecky cedar siding and, everything becoming sort of Bonanza-esque and Bonanza oriented. And that really began to play merry hell with the actual, and you can see the Victorian building sort of hiding behind this giant Bonanza-fied storefront that got put onto these buildings. And so this is what was happening all over town. And people that were concerned about the actual real history were worried that the fake history was going to subsume the real history. So, and now, of course, because it's more than 50 years old, the fake history has become real history. So now the preservationists are really in a big pickle. So that's lots of fun to argue about at cocktail parties. So, and then to add even more interest to the situation, in the middle 1960s, along come the hippies. And the hippies had been intrigued by the fake history and the sort of the mythology of the 19th century, and the cowboys. And you can see this is Chandler Laughlin III, otherwise known as Travis T. Hip, who was one of the major pushers behind the hippie exodus to the Comstock in the middle 1960s. Chandler had been many things: a radio personality, the entrepreneur of a very successful coffee house and nightclub in the East Bay, and general sort of personality behind a lot of the alternative movement in the early Bohemian days in San Francisco and Berkeley. And in the middle 1960s, 1963, 64, 65, he and a bunch of other folks began coming up to the Comstock and lived in Silver City, along with a guy named Don Works and a bunch of other folks that had been involved in the cafes and the music scene in San Francisco. And so they came up with their expectations and their interests in the old mining towns and the 19th century, of the Comstock. And so they also brought their interest to Virginia City. And in 1965, they got a hold of the old Comstock House Hotel and a guy named Doug Yanofsky, in order to be able to convince his father that he was actually doing something worthwhile with his father's money, created the Red Dog Saloon, along with Travis and with Don Works and some other of the usual suspects from San Francisco. And they really kind of got it together and began to create what would later be known as the psychedelic scene. There was a group called the Charlatans, and here they are, complete in various costumes that they managed to raid from the old Fox Theater in San Francisco, who were an early psychedelic band from San Francisco, who came up and with a house band in the summer of 1965 at the Red Dog. They began experimenting with LSD and with basic 3-chord blues influenced rock and roll music, electrified. They like to carry firearms around and have a lot of fun with that. They recruited a lot of people to come up and live at the Red Dog. It was quite the scene, and it really set the tone for the beginnings of the psychedelic scene and the psychedelic movement in San Francisco. And in fact, all of the basic elements of what became the acid tests were sort of road tested in San Francisco. in Virginia City in the summer of 1965, with the light shows. I mean, Bill Ham was there with the acid, with the music, with people dressing up in interesting ways, all of that would later became the scene that exploded in San Francisco in 1966, 67, 68, were essentially developed and experimented with in Virginia City in 1965 and 66. And that was another layer of development and interest in Virginia City that has not really been explored in any significant way. The other thing that is very interesting to see is that this is also reflected in the beginnings of psychedelic art. This is a poster that was done for the first show at the Red Dog Saloon in 1965, called The Seed, because it was the first real sort of vaguely Edwardian influenced psychedelic poster that was made. And it now sells, an original of this now sells for somewhere in the $10,000 to $15,000 range, if not more. I had the privilege of meeting the leading expert on psychedelic poster art at a conference in San Francisco in 2017, and talked to him about the influence of this poster, which is developed by a guy named George Hunter, who was one of the members of the Charlatans. And he did this while he was up in Virginia City, and he talked about how all of the later sort of psychedelic art sort of emerged out of this particular scene in the summer of 1965 in Virginia City. So this is another layer of the Virginia City experience and what was going on in this town in the 20th century that needs to be added to our consideration of how Virginia City evolved in the 20th century. And again, this is an area that historians have just really sort of started to explore. And I have to tip my hat to Mary Works with the State Museum, who put together, and her dad Don Works was involved with this scene back in the day, and she put together a brilliant documentary film called The Life and Times of the Red Dog Saloon, and that was one of the first pieces of sort of serious documentary work that was done on this movement, and it's really worth checking out if you get a chance to have a look at it. So there's an awful lot that has happened in Virginia City in the 20th century that makes it just as interesting as the sort of the high level history in the 19th century that so many people are familiar with. And I was really pleased to be able to look at this history and to put this little examination together. So that's as far as I've gotten with this. Again, the idea was eventually to amend a National Register nomination, but that did not come off for various reasons. And that's what we have for everybody. So I'm happy to answer questions. And thank you very much.
Bert, that was amazing.
Oh, well, thank you so much. I'll turn off the PowerPoint, and anybody has any questions, feel free to fire away.
Well, I'll start. Sometimes it takes a little bit. Sometimes people start putting messages in right away. But what was my question? As I say, I know the Red Dog is still in existence, and the Historical Society had worked on an exhibit with many years ago, and they definitely embrace that history of the Red Dog Saloon, and I can't remember the gentleman that lived in the depot up in Virginia.
Here's Powell.
Okay, he had that original sign from that photo,
Oh, yeah, yeah. He had the sign,
and he had the
and he had
curtain.
a whole ton of ephemera
Yeah,
and stuff, and he had the original curtains that they'd gotten from the Fox Theater, and
yes.
yeah, a lot of it went to Holabird for auction when he had to move out of the depot. His health
Okay.
failed, and I don't even know if Pierce is still alive. Actually, it's been a long time since I've seen him. He used to pop by my office on a regular basis, usually if he needed a lift to go get cigarettes or something, because his mobility was not that great. So he'd managed to toddle down to my office and then bum a ride in the truck up to get smokes or something, and we'd have a good
Yeah, he
time.
definitely was an interesting character,
Oh, right out of the interesting character catalog. I mean,
yeah.
definitely a real Comstock original. And there's no question about that. And very sharp guy. Yeah, definitely a lot of fun to talk to.
Oh, absolutely. So, you showed the great photograph that was the picnic. I don't know if I've seen that picture
Yeah.
of the opening for Virginia City.
That's an NDOT picture.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
NDOT has put a lot of their photographs up online, and I snitched
Okay.
that from them. So if you do you remember Liz Dickey? She was an architectural historian with NDOT.
Okay.
She put me onto a lot of their stuff, and I don't know if it's been publicly posted or not, but NDOT has an awful lot of good photographs that would be worth cross-pollinating on if you get a chance.
Yeah, as I say, I know we've used a few here and there, and so yeah, they're a great resource.
Mhm.
But so wasn't there people were mad because they didn't have the opening and the
Oh,
Hollywood people
oh
stayed in
yeah.
Virginia City. Wasn't that part of
Oh
it?
yeah, they were totally mad. They were gypped. They were ready for all the stars to show up, and they didn't show up, and I think they came close to having a big riot up there. And of course they were all drunk because they'd been drinking since noon. And so a lot of them were very, very, rambunctious, as the saying goes.
Well, as I say, because then the second day they had their debut in Reno, and that's where you see the historic Reno Arch with several Hollywood stars, including I think Ronald Reagan. He wasn't in the movie, mind you, but they were bringing people up and posing on horses under the
Right, right,
arch.
right, right,
Yeah,
right. Yeah. Judith Cordray gets a no prize because she recognized Mary Pickford. So thumbs up there.
yeah, they were all under contract to show up at any of the what they called a premiere showing. That
Okay.
was
Right,
by
right.
contract for that studio.
So Judith did have another comment. She wanted to know the date of the cartoon of the woman celebrating her divorce by throwing the ring in. Do you
I
know
am
that time
not.
period?
I don't believe I have a date for that. I believe it was probably sometime in the 1930s, but we'd have to look into the Luheimer's archive to
Oh,
really get a sense of that. But my guess is probably 1935, 1940, somewhere in
okay.
there.
Okay. Yeah, as I say, the fashion style, I would say 30,
Yeah, yeah.
early
Mela would
40s.
know.
Yeah.
I got that image from Mela. That's Mela
Absolutely.
Harmon, for those of you that,
Yes.
yeah.
Yes.
There is another question. Was Geiger grade easily traveled from Reno in the first half of the 20th century? Was there still a VNT service from Reno or Carson City?
Until
Two
1950.
questions.
Mhm.
Yeah, the Geiger grade was vastly improved between 1936 and 1938, with an all-weather road. Before that, it was not nearly as good. And in fact, that was a major New Deal improvement project, including the very tasty Geiger Lookout, with all the nice CCC
Picnic
rock
tables.
work and everything up there, which one of these days I hope to convince NDOT to put on the National Register of Historic Places.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, be a great addition, and recognition of the CCC,
Mhm.
to get that listed. But another project for another day. Um, The railroad service to Virginia City continued until, I want to say, when was the last train? 1930.
The 30s,
It was
something.
the late 30s. Oh my God, my train foamer friends are going to shoot me for not remembering that. But I believe it was 1938. And actually, Beebe and Clegg were involved in the final sort of Pacific Railroad Society expedition trains that went up there.
Okay.
But
It
yeah,
was-
those and then the tracks were taken up during the war for scrap.
Okay.
That was between Reno and Carson that it ended finally.
Well, the Reno and Carson
1950.
service ended in 1950.
Yeah, I was on the train.
Oh wow, I'm
Wow.
very jealous.
Yeah, it
Of
went
course, I
more
wasn't.
sideways, back and forth sideways than it did forward.
Oh yeah, oh yeah. No, I can
Yeah.
imagine. My only
I-
claim to fame is that I got to ride the California Zephyr in 1965.
Oh, good one.
Yeah.
We do have another question. Did I hear you correctly that the TE was the largest circulating paper at one point in the United States after Beebe and Clegg
The
revived it?
largest circulating weekly.
Weekly. Okay.
Yeah, it had an international following. It was quite the chic thing to have the Territorial Enterprise sitting around your natty New York penthouse apartment for people to giggle at and read. And it was mostly based on how completely insane and hilarious Beebe's writing was. I mean, he was. There's a line he once called one of his publishers a what is it, a black bag of bombazine bile, I think. Yeah, I mean, if you go back and read his stuff,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's pointed and it's hilarious and it's nasty and it's just a riot. Yeah, great stuff.
Absolutely. So I know it's been many years that the last family, they who owned that building, the back of the building, you know, had passed away, and they were trying to figure out what to do with the equipment, and then also the the Mark Twain Museum kind of, at the
Yeah,
desk.
no, I worked with a guy that managed to get a hold of the building, and he had no idea what he was getting into. And
Okay.
the building was in rough shape, and because it was John Schaefer that owned it for years, and
Couldn't think of the name.
yeah, no, John Schaefer and his family and
Yeah.
he had the Mark Twain Saloon across the street and
Okay.
ran it for years and years, and then the family sort of divvied up the various assets, and they sold the Territorial Enterprise, and the guy that got a hold of it really didn't know what he was getting into. And I got him hooked up with Mel Green to do an assessment of the building. And I think that the price tag of stabilizing the building was one of those things that made him sort of have heart palpitations and have to have a good lie down. And I don't know exactly where that whole project is right now. I don't know how far along they've gotten and where they are. It's one of the things I might ask Shelley when I go see her, is to find out what the status of it is. But yeah, it's one of those buildings that you sit there and worry about because it's so important to Virginia City.
Oh, very much so.
And but I had a watch list as long as my arm when I was up there. So yeah.
So you didn't mention during your talk, when did Virginia City and the Comstock district, when was that actually created? Because you had talked about how
Well, it
became
depends on
bonanza-fied
which designation you're interested in. It was
Yeah.
made a National Historic Landmark in 1961 as a result of the Silver Centennial efforts in 1959.
Okay.
It was added to the National Register of Historic Places originally in 1966 when the register was created. And then there were amendments, significant amendments in 1978 and again in 1987. But the bit that I operated under, which is the state designation that has actual teeth, that, you know, made me be the guy that tells you what color to paint your house and, you know, no, you can't put that fence up, and maybe run around and annoy the hell out of people and yeah, all that. That was passed by the state legislature in 1969. And that's the one that actually gives real control over the built environment on the Comstock. So,
Okay.
so yeah.
So how long was SHPO? Oh, so was that essentially when the district was developed, state historic preservation, then started overseeing that
Well, yeah, that was
right away,
designated
or was
as,
that a little bit
yeah, the
later?
SHPO was, well, no, because the State Historic Preservation Office wasn't actually created in Nevada until 1978.
Okay, I was thinking it
And we
was a
were the
little
last
later,
state in the
but
country
okay,
to actually create a State Historic Preservation Office. It took us a long time.
okay,
Oh, boy.
Yeah. But because the National Historic Preservation Act was passed in 1966,
okay,
and that created the mechanism whereby states could create state historic preservation offices and give them the authority to consult about federal activities, you know, in the state, and have, you know, review of federal activities and all that good stuff that SHPO does. But
okay,
it took the state a long time. It took the state of Nevada a long time to get it together and designate a SHPO and create a state preservation office.
okay. I thought there was something between that, but I wasn't quite
Yeah,
sure.
there was a delay, and so
Okay,
it was originally a standalone state commission,
okay.
and
Well,
then it was.
what I was gonna, sorry to interrupt, I was gonna
Oh,
say,
no.
what I was excited about when I was watching your presentation was the 1950, not, oh wait, 59 banner? The,
Yeah, mhm.
yeah, the silver,
Yeah, the Silver Centennial. Yeah,
Silver Centennial, because I know like Helen Marie Thomas was involved with that, you know, because
very
you're
much
talking about
so.
the Marie building um and her family, you know, being part of that early on. So um who donated? Do you remember who donated it? I'm so
Uh,
sorry. I just was
it,
excited seeing it, and I don't know if I've seen
you know,
banners.
it totally escapes me as to who had that. I think Joe Curtis had a hand in bringing that into us, but
Oh, nice.
you know, I'd have to go back and look. Um, it's been, geez, maybe 15 years.
Okay.
So, you know, and I I'm not a museum person, so, you know, I mean, I know nothing about all of this, and you know, and I'm not that good a bureaucrat either. I always used to tell people I'm a good architectural historian. I'm a crappy bureaucrat. So, you know, I don't do paperwork
That
very
of
well. So, you know, yeah. If you get a hold of if you got a hold of Mike Sprinkle, he might be able to scare up the paperwork on that and see who has it. But it's
Okay.
hanging up on the wall up there.
Oh, nice. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, it's in the main exhibit room.
Oh,
And
okay.
along with we did a duplicate for the well, let's see, that was 100 years. So we did a duplicate one for 150 years. Yeah.
Yeah.
So we
Okay.
replicated it for 150 years. So we got one for each one.
Very
Hey,
cool.
Bert,
Yeah.
in that same photo, that was Steve Saylor, I think in the center, rolling things out. And isn't he running the territorial enterprise now? And
As a
I
museum, he is actually kind of the director or
the
for that
director of that.
museum now. Yeah.
Oh, great.
Mhm.
Good, good, good. Yeah, see, I'm kind of out of the loop as far as what goes on the Comstock these days. I'm only marginally connected back in as to what cooks up there. I sort of decided that I would butt out, you know, and let the new kids, you know, play without me sticking my big fat nose in. So, you know, I am only marginally tuned in as to what's going on up there.
Well, as I say, during your time when they had built the building, and you guys actually have an archive, kind of, don't you? You know, there were some archaeological and some
Well,
datations of photography and other stuff over time, or
not really, because
okay.
we don't have any storage. We don't have
I would say you had
we
that
don't have
upstairs.
we don't have a climate controlled facility, so we're really limited in what we can take. We don't have an archivist. We don't have, so we really tried to limit the amount of stuff that we took.
Yeah.
I had archaeologists before I was in the building. They just sort of moved in and they wouldn't let me spray for them. But it's like bats. I mean, Ron Reno and all of his junk from Silver City just sort of moved into the attic before I even got a chance to get the keys to the building. So, so yeah, we have archaeological remains that aren't climate sensitive stashed in the attic up there, but I have no idea what's up there. That I never did, frankly. That was sort of Ron's bag, and the Rons, plural, Ron Reno and Ron James.
Yeah.
And at this point, I don't know who could tell you what's up there.
Okay.
I think a lot of the stuff has gone back to UNR.
Okay.
Because a lot of the stuff was from various digs that were sponsored through UNR.
I was gonna say like the Boston Saloon and some of the other stuff.
Yeah. A
Right.
lot of that stuff I think has gone back to the collection at the university. But again, that was all the archaeologist universe. And when I first went to work, I had to ask somebody what a lithic was and why you wanted to scatter them. So I know very little about the actual archaeological universe. It's like, yeah, little bits in the ground that you dig up and make up stories about.
Well, Bert, this was a great program. I
Well,
really
I really
appreciate.
am very glad that everybody enjoyed it. And again, if you get any more questions wandering in, please feel free to email me or let me know. And I hope it was entertaining and made some sort of sense. I never know what the hell I'm saying when I actually give these things. So, hopefully it was marginally cogent.
No, it was great.
Bert, I want to take just a second and thank you from the bottom of my black little heart.
Oh, a pleasure, Neal. It was
No,
really great to see you.
You were absolutely wonderful.
Well, it's been way too long, so keep on trucking, and let me know what else I can do to help out. And
Okay.
definitely hassle Candace about giving a presentation, because she'd be
Yes.
hilarious and brilliant, and I'd get a chance to tune in and ask her annoying questions, and that would be way fun.
Is that the same Candace that did all of the work on the cemeteries?
That's the one. That's the one.
Candace Wheeler.
Yep. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. And I can get you your
Wonderful.
contact information if you want it.
Okay.
Well, then,
I'm going to sign off and let Cherry do her thing.
Okay. You guys take care. Thanks again
Yeah.
for the opportunity.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, let me send it back to Terry, and thanks again for the Washoe County Libraries for helping us with these monthly programs. We so appreciate it, and I hope everybody enjoyed today's program. So I'll send it back to you, Terry.
Well, I have a black heart also, and it too is very thankful. That was like a dream program.
Oh,
No, it's fascinating, and you are wonderful to listen to. So thank you.
well, my pleasure. You guys take care.
Well, I'm still going. Thank you all for joining us, and a heartfelt thanks to Sherry Hazorn with the Nevada Historical Society, historian Neal Cobb, and Tim, our library system tech wizard, for making this event possible.
Definitely.
Have a great day.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.